Hello, environmental science. I am back at it with another policy lecture. Um, this one covers environmental policy and will be one of the final uh, an economics policy lectures of this unit. There will not be a formal assessment of the unit, though there are some review activities that will be on Canvas um, throughout the rest of the week. So, today we're talking about international policy and the approaches to forming that international policy. First thing, we're just going to talk about why we need it. Um, so, environmental policy helps governments of the world come to agreements on environmental issues because environmental issues aren't necessarily restricted to borders. If one country pollutes a river and that river carries water through the borders to another country, it becomes that other country's issue. Air pollution is also a big idea when it comes to international environmental policy. Each country doesn't have its own atmosphere, so whatever one country puts into the atmosphere, all of the countries have to handle and deal with. Animals also migrate. So if let's see, a bunch of geese in Canada got really, really sick, and those geese migrated down to the United States, then the United States would also have to deal with other animals contracting that sickness, so that would be considered an environmental issue. And also multinational companies. So there are companies in the world that do business in multiple countries. And when it comes to pollution and regulation of resources, multiple countries will have to handle that kind of stuff. So if if Walmart exists here and in the European Union, then and if the European Union had stricter requirements for pollution, and Walmart went to the European Union and was like, well, the United States lets me get away with way more, so I'm just going to do that here. That's why we would need environmental policy. So I have some examples of governing bodies that carry out environmental policy. The first one is the United Nations. The United Nations was founded in 1945 to promote peace, solve economic, social, and cultural and humanitarian issues. So the United Nations was founded in 1945 and promotes peace and solves economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian issues. I know it's a little fuzzy right there. Another I Another international policy making body is the European Union. A bunch of European countries came together to create this all over governing system. The European Union has something called the European Environmental Agency. So, like the United States has the Environmental Protection Agency, this would be like the European version of that, only instead of states, it's countries. Um, Non-governmental organizations or NGOs are also big examples of how policy gets influenced on a multinational scale. Some examples are Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Foundation. The World Wildlife Foundation, you've probably seen their logo is that little panda thing, but they have influence over policy and have a lot of money and resources and research that goes into how environmental policy would affect the earth. Um, we also have the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization was established in 1995 and promotes free and fair trade. And then finally, we've got the World Bank. So in 1944, the World Bank was established, essentially acting as a bank for countries. So, like we would go to the bank to get a loan, countries can go to the World Bank to get a loan. Essentially, it provides credits, loans, and grants to help growing populations. So, if a population is growing rapidly and they have the money to do something, but they don't have the money to do it environmentally friendly, the World Bank could offer them a loan or a credit or a grant to accomplish the tasks that they were going to accomplish, but do it in a way that would impact the entire world more positively. So those are examples of sorry, those are examples of organizations that influence international policy. And now we're going to talk about different approaches. I think I added one too many P's in the word approach right there, but these are approaches to international policy. One of the first ways you could do it is through the command and control approach. So essentially, government sets rules and threatens punishments. The government sets rules and threatens punishments. So if you don't follow these environmental guidelines, then you will be punished in some way, shape, or form. So that's one way. Another way is through tax breaks and subsidies, which is kind of the opposite. So countries can give tax breaks to businesses or individuals who are environmentally friendly. So if a company decides to switch over to using more renewable energy sources, governments can choose to incentivize doing that by offering a tax break. Subsidies also exists. A subsidy is essentially the government giving away money or resources to encourage certain activities or lower prices. A lot of the times you will hear the word subsidy used by in regard to farms. So if something happens and it wipes out a big soybean plant or a bunch of soybeans, the government can offer soybean farmers money, grants, or resources to keep their prices lower so the rest of the economy doesn't feel the impact as strongly as that farmer did. Another way that environmental policy can be enforced is through a green tax. So, a green tax is just a tax that is imposed on companies that participate in activities that harm the environment. Taxes imposed on companies that participate in activities that harm the environment. So, if a company puts so much pollution into a certain river, the government can tax the amount of pollution they're putting out there. Or a if a factory has a certain amount of carbon emissions, the government can create a tax to say, okay, if your company releases this much CO2 into the atmosphere, you have to pay some sort of tax, so we can put that money into things like subsidies and tax breaks for people who are doing good for the environment. Another way that countries regulate the amount of environmental policy is through the cap and trade system. The cap and trade system is essentially the government determining how much overall pollution is allowed, and then they issue permits to allow certain operations to pollute a fraction of that amount. So the government determines how much overall pollution is allowed and issues permits to allow certain operations to pollute a fraction of that amount. So if the government had, let's say, just pulling random numbers out of my head, if the government said, okay, we are going to allow 5 tons of CO2 to be released into the atmosphere in our country this year. So they might say, okay, this company can release this many pounds, and this company can release this many pounds. And if you go over that, that's where the taxes and payments and punishments kind of come into play. The last way that environmental policies are kind of enforced or carried out is through local incentives. So, just like we talked about local government kind of reacting like federal government, local governments can also provide incentives. Usually, they're financial, especially on the local level. The local systems don't necessarily have the resources to measure pollution and like pull off a cap and trade system, but they do have the ability to provide tax breaks for companies that like have active recycling programs or use alternative energy sources. So if that is our approaches to international policy, we are going to talk about the process of getting that policy put into place. So the first step is to identify the problem. The first step is to identify the problem. We can't solve a problem if we don't know what it is. After we have identified our problem, we have to identify the causes of that problem. We have to treat the actual issues rather than just mitigating the side effects. After we find the causes, we can start working on solutions. So if we have a solution in mind about how we're going to address the root causes of a problem, the next step number 4, is to get organized. So if you are not already a part of the government, or if you're a part of the government, you have to get all of your information ready to communicate. Without the ability to accurately and effectively promote your solutions and explain why they're needed, you're not going to get very far. Step 5 is to gain access. So if you are not a part of a governmental system, lobbying is a way to do that. Lobbying is essentially efforts to influence an elected official to support a specific interest. Lobbying can be done for or against something. So just like we can lobby for environmental support, we can also lobby against it. It's just essentially influencing an elected official to support a specific interest. This can be done monetarily. This can be done with a letter writing campaign. This can be done with calling your local representative. Anything that is an effort to influence that elected official to support a specific interest. And in this case, it would be our environmental policy. And then last step, you can't really see it. Step 6 is to help the solution become a policy. And we talked about the process of that, going through the legislative branch of the government, going through the executive branch of the government, before finally being enforced by the judicial branch of the government. And that's essentially the process of how you get from a problem to a solution. It's a lot more complicated than these 6 steps in this portion of this PowerPoint or this concept map would give rise to, but definitely not impossible. So yeah, no, that is what I have on international policy. If you have any questions whatsoever, please let me know. I am here for you whenever.